Good evening and welcome back to Birdman's Tech. In the last video, we covered the Aya Neo from Aya Neo Devices. Today we're going to go ahead and cover the Onexplayer from One Netbook, this being the second of the three competitors that I had stated I was going to cover. So we're going to go through three categories. First, unique design choices that the Onexplayer took versus the GPT Win 3 and Aya Neo, and the pros and cons to those choices. Ergonomics, how long is it comfortable to hold for, is it even comfortable at all? And then finally performance, and a few key notes to keep in mind when thinking of performance on these devices in general, any of these styles with the Steam Deck coming out, and any potential further competitors that may come. So first of all, unique design choices. What did it do different? So they went and did a couple of different things that are highly discussed. The first being the resolution on the screen. It is a large 8.4-inch 1600p. For those who are unfamiliar, 1600p is better known as 1440p or 2K. It's just a little bit taller than normal at 16:10 instead of a 16:9 ratio. So to give you kind of an idea, that's where this screen stands, whereas the Win 3 and the Neo took 720 and 800p, again being the 720 just kind of stretched a little bit taller quality-wise. And this screen does look amazing. I can't say, because I haven't tested it, that it's going to stand up to the color accurate studio standard screens. But for me, playing a game, when a game is able to push out that 600p, it does look amazing. Large screen, lots of detail, very crisp. However, the caveat there is that it is hard to get some games to run that, depending on whether you're okay with 30 FPS or if you're aiming for the full 60 FPS the screen can handle. So that is something to keep in mind with this device. It is able to put out a very nice high resolution, but the game needs to be capable of running at that. Otherwise, having that screen doesn't really help you. Second, keyboard. Each of the three devices took their approach. With the Onexplayer, they decided to copy the Surface Pro and other devices by using a pogo pin style keyboard. Now this keyboard has a very tiny little touchpad. I mean, I can barely fit 2 fingers onto it. It is very inaccurate. Honestly, I would say it's better than nothing, but half the time I get more accurate clicks by just using the touchscreen. So if you absolutely need to use a mouse, it is there, but it is definitely not ideal. Keyboard sizing, again, it is pretty tiny. It is usable, but I mean, trying to sit here and just put my fingers on the ASD, very scrunched. So if you need something to play some World of Warcraft or other games like that, it'll do. But I wouldn't say typing an essay on this thing over long term is going to be very comfortable. Depends on the size of your hands. Mine aren't the largest, but unless you have fairly tiny hands, again, you're going to cramp if you try and write an essay on this. But it definitely is leagues above using the touch and haptic feedback keyboard the Win 3 uses when it comes to longer typing. Downside to this, of course, again, just like every other choice, caveats, it does not stick very well. The magnets on this guy are fairly weak. It will not hold its weight, and it does not like to line up half the time under here. Unlike the Surface, it does not want to sit nice and up to the screen. It just lays flat. Ergonomically, that does not help its case with how small it is. And overall, just feels a little flimsy, and it is not lappable. You would not be able to sit in your bed and play a game using a keyboard on this guy. So if you need something for occasional inputs for gaming, it doesn't work very well. If you need to write something out and are able to set it down, this is going to do very well for you. Another design choice they did would be its overall, just its size. This guy is much larger than either of the two. They did ergonomically fit this more to the hand, so it is not too bad to hold, but it is giant and it is heavy. Now, ergonomically speaking, this does work to its advantage as it is a little bit bulkier. It's able to fit into the hand a little bit better. If you have smaller hands, this is where this is going to unfortunately be a con for you. The larger size will make it a little uncomfortable for you potentially. The controls, however, are nice and to the sides. However, overall, it does get to be very heavy over time. So the longer you play, the heavier it will get. If you find that the Switch gets heavy after a while and uncomfortable, this is going to do the same thing but only worse, seeing as its weight is just that much more. Control-wise, ergonomically, they are amazing. They are fairly well placed for my hand spacing. This will depend on you if you have larger or smaller hands, but overall they are great. For the most part, they do feel nice, clicky, very crisp. The only downside being the D-pad. If you're going to play a fighting game where you need precise combos and other things using the D-pad, you will find that it is not the greatest for that. Is it playable? Yes. I mean, it functions, but depending on your definition of what you're looking for it to be playable, it may not be up to par. And then finally, of course, like I said, performance. Now, as far as performance goes, when a game plays nice with the Intel drivers and the drivers behave, it runs great. We have right here Heaven Benchmark running nice and smooth. It is going at about 45 FPS. I have it at standard, non-turboed, at I believe it was medium settings. It looks great at 1600p native resolution. It does amazing. The only caveat here being, while we have a lot of raw power, unfortunately Intel's drivers are still undergoing some improvements, seeing as XE is still new and recent. So a lot of games just crash straight to desktop. I have loaded many games only to find them to crash immediately. Like, I will see the screen go black, might see a logo, and then that is it. It just goes straight back to desktop. And I load it on the A Neo, it runs perfect. Launch it on the Win 3, crash straight to desktop. You can, of course, try jumping around from driver versions newer and older to get certain games working. Some work better on newer, some work better on older. And so if you're willing to tinker and find what driver works best with each update, then you will find that there's a lot of power in there to get a lot of performance. However, if you don't want to tinker it, you want it to work well, that right there is, unfortunately, as of this moment, going to be a big caveat on this device. As they improve those drivers, I hope to see that change. I would love to be able to play a lot more games on this device. And then another thing on performance, just how high are you going to run the resolution? Obviously, 1600p, you may only manage 30 FPS, and you'll say that's unplayable because you're playing Fortnite. You want as many FPS as you can get. And then you turn it down to 800p and do the integer scaling to scale up to the 1600p screen, and you'll be able to push out to 60, for example. I'm just making up these numbers, but to give you kind of an idea. Obviously, the lower resolutions are going to be much easier to run. Right now, it's only getting anywhere from 30s to the 50 FPS, depending on the scene in Heaven. If I were to drop it to 800p, I could definitely push those frames up higher. Now, the question being, like I said, just what do you define as playable? A couple of things to keep in mind with these devices. As I said, this will be for the Onexplayer, for the Neo, the Win 3, Steam Deck, and any and all other devices of this nature that'll come out, or any further competitors, or even like the Win Max. Obviously, these performance scores, these frames, how well the game runs, it's going to vary on what resolution are you going to run. More so with the Onexplayer since it's higher resolution. Lower resolution screens, you probably won't lower them too much lower, because the lower you get, the worse it'll look. Going from 600 to 800 is not too bad. 700 down to 360p is not going to look great at all. So what resolution are you going to run at for these high resolutions? What TDP are you going to run? The more power you're willing to feed it, the more performance you will get. But the more power you give it, the less your battery is going to give you, time-wise and run-wise. So if you have a 60-hour battery, 60-watt-hour battery, and you pull 30 watts an hour, you're only going to get 2 hours. But if you're willing to go by with only 20 watt-hours total usage, you'll get 3 hours out of that same battery. So just what performance do you want to give and how much power you're going to give it? Again, you got to keep your expectations within reason. So no matter which device you're looking at, you kind of got to decide what performance do you want out of it and how long of a battery life are you willing to give it. Because the less you're willing to have for battery life, the more power you can give it, the more performance. If you want a nice long runtime, you're going to have to lower those watts. Stretch that battery a little further, and that's going to unfortunately lower your performance. It's a trade-off. You'll have to decide where your balance is. And with that, obviously, different sizes also will give you different batteries. overall a larger battery will give you a longer runtime, unless again you turn up those TDPs. The higher you turn it up, the lower you're going to get for your runtime. And finally, last thing to keep in mind, what's going to fit your overall style the most. Onexplayer I use at home when I'm laying in bed. Win 3 is great for when I want to go somewhere during lunch break. I don't have a lot of room, can't really carry anything bulky. The Neo is good all around at home, at work, when I'm able to carry a little bit more size wise, and then, or just Intel does not like that game. So, and finally, compatibility. When you look at Intel versus AMD, what is going to be the most compatible for your game? There is no end all be all. We have the 4500U in the Neo, we've got the i5, i7s in these competitors from Win 3, the X-Player, we have the new processor with the Steam Deck, and then who knows what the future competitors may use. But no matter what they are, what is that game going to prefer, and what is it going to run best on? So the best thing if you're choosing between these three is to do your research on what does the game best run in, what is it best compatible with, processors wise, Intel, AMD, best GPU perhaps, runtime, and just what kind of watts do you need to feed the CPU and what that runtime will be per game to get an idea. Because again, it's all going to be defined by what you see as playable. If you have too high of an expectation, you're going to have to really push this device and it may not meet it. But if you keep it within a realistic expectation, all three of these devices will do wonders. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.